All right, Joel, I think we're going to have to call an emergency meeting of the podcast, especially because of something that came up in this week's news. I think this is the only way we can really approach this discussion. What are we going to call the podcast now? Because
Right.
looking ahead a little bit, they have removed the spawn chunks from Java Minecraft. So, I mean, like, we're counting down the days until the name of our show is like an esoteric reference that only people in the know will get, right? Do we want to maintain that, like, exclusivity? Or do we maybe want to consider a name change at this point in our careers?
I had a howl at a tweet from friend of the show, Whip, saying like, looking forward to the rebrand.
Yes,
So sorry,
exactly.
you guys.
We're also very honored to have Sliced Lime officially apologize to us in our Discord, although he didn't say why until the snapshot changelog dropped. But oh my goodness,
No spoilers, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm now suggesting that we officially rebrand ourselves Chunks Loaded by the Force Load command, or something to that effect. Because oh my goodness, yeah, it's very strange to have built like a brand or an identity of sorts around this and a community around this, and then suddenly the reference that you're making with the name is something that may be a thing of the past. So I'm wondering what we can take from Minecraft that we could guarantee is going to stay in the game for good, so we don't run into this problem again. Should we be calling ourselves the Copper Pickaxe Podcast now, in celebration of some of the new tools that are apparently here for good?
I think we nailed it with our extended show, Render Distance. Like that's just a general video game term. Like we could keep that. I do like G's despawned chunks suggestion in our Discord.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a number of people joking in about different things. The podcast formerly known as Spawn Chunks is also funny.
Yes. Yeah, we'll call ourselves the Iron Farm or something like that in the near future.
Oh, yeah.
But we're taking suggestions from this point onwards, I think, in our YouTube comments, which already noted on last week's episode that the spawn chunks has been removed, and so they were saying, oh no, what does this mean for the podcast? Well, for now it means hello, welcome to the Spawn Chunks. This is episode 361 for Monday, August 4th, 2025, and this is still a podcast all about Minecraft, despite the fact that Minecraft may not all be about us anymore. You can listen to this wherever you get your podcasts. You have a video version on YouTube and Spotify, and if you're enjoying the show, consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this. My name is Johnny, but the internet knows me as Pixelriffs, and joining me as always is Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
Hello, and I'm feeling pretty fantastic because I went to go see Fantastic Four this weekend, and that dominated most of the discussion in our pre-show, the Render Distance, which is the extended version of the program that our patrons get. So you can go to patreon.com/thespawnchunks. If you'd like to support the show, you get 30 minutes or so of extra podcasts every single week. You get access to bonus things like the monthly Minecraft Hangout that's going to come up on the last Saturday of August. That's August 30th right now. That may change depending on like holidays and different things, but right now that's the plan. We also have a quarterly Hangout, and that's where Johnny and I hang out and talk about the YouTube numbers, the download metrics, how the show is doing, and the Q2 Hangout should be coming up sometime in early August, now that we've had some time for those numbers to coagulate on the back end and give us some information. So once again, the Spawn Chunks on Patreon is the place to go if you'd like to support the podcast. And a big shout out and thank you to everyone that does that. It's the first of the month, and we really appreciate all your support.
On this week's episode, we're mostly going to be talking about the Java Edition snapshot, which dropped this week, which finally brings the Copper Golem and the new shelves to Java Edition testing floors. In the meantime, though, we're going to do our quick login and talk about what's new in our Minecraft lives. So, Joel, what's new on the Citadel?
I have just about finished the West Hill River, the Spruce River in the valley, and I am procrastinating on the waterfall. I may do it tomorrow. I may not do it tomorrow. I don't know. It's the last part that needs to get finished, but everything else is done. And I'm relieved because I feel like I've been sharing screenshots of this river for like the last 2 weeks. And I'm really happy with the way that this turned out. I thought this north section was going to be really challenging. This is the ridge that you kind of come over as you come down into the valley. I put a lot of work a few weeks ago into putting a look off up there. It's a really large cliff. It's going to be 20 blocks tall, give or take. And I was really kind of worried about how that was going to look. But I discovered a trick that worked out quite well. Embarrassed that I've never thought of this before, and realized what the issue was when you're looking at a Minecraft cliff that's been generated in, especially older school generation, because a lot of the West Hill Valley is like 1.15 or before, because I started it just before the Nether update, and it's coarse dirt. So on one of the custom cliffs, I was like, it looks like vanilla Minecraft generation. Like it just looks so basic, and I couldn't figure out why. And it's the grass side texture of like little strip of grass at the top, that very classic Minecraft kind of block look. You remove them all and you put them with coarse dirt that doesn't have and will not get a grass on the top of it, and all of a sudden the cliff makes sense. It looks like cliffs that you see in real life that are dirt sides with like grass bits at the top, but not like anywhere down the side of it. And it worked out quite well. I'm really happy with that. And it just kind of makes the environment as you walk in and out of the valley, because this north ridge is something you look at when you're leaving West Hill, and something that you can see from various builds. Like there's a little pier and there's like a little road that goes to a fishing hut, and you can see this thing kind of like right in front of you. And so I put in some custom reeds. I added extra firefly bushes. They create a really cool ambient environment as you come through the bottom of the pass, and this custom cliff. And then also, if you remember a few weeks ago, I did that farm where I was using some dry grass that kind of like came down and ended at the end of the farm on a riverbank. Well, the other side of that riverbank now has some more firefly bushes that you can see from the little wharf that was there. And I did my best not to have feature creep take me all the way around the corner, but basically I stood wherever a player would stand within my build and basically filled in the riverbanks. But once it goes around the corner, that's it. Like I'm out. I don't need to start, landscaping into the distance where I can't see it. And so it was able to be wrapped up on Saturday. I'm quite happy with everything. It's one of those things where, again, like pick a key feature like the side of a bridge or something that you can see from a wharf, make that custom, find another key feature, 20 blocks down the river and make that custom, and then just bone meal in between. And it really, like, you feel like it's been handcrafted, even though a good chunk of it is just me spamming bone meal and, tweaking the odd thing that shows up that you don't want, like a bright red poppy or something like that. But other than that, it worked out really well. So I'm really happy with the way that it's turned out. And it's kind of strange now to have only 3 things left on the to-do list. I've got a little patch of green where all my shulker boxes were. So once I've removed them, it feels very empty. I have to fix that. Probably get like a rock or something in there. I've got the waterfall, which I mentioned, which is going to be the bane of my existence. And then the basement of the keep has to be transformed into a honey mead distillery. And that's it. That's the end. We're real close. Like August is absolutely going to be the finishing line for West Hill, which is really exciting.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's end of an era, but hopefully the beginning of a new one. And do you have anything else in mind to do once West Hill is done, but whilst you're sort of between projects? Because I know you said you don't want to rush into the sci-fi stuff so soon.
Yeah, I did pop back to the modern city looking for some materials here and there, and realized that it really feels unfinished. Like your experience there is pretty odd. So I might try to go there. I was actually hanging out with Steven. That's who I went to go see Fantastic Four with, and he's also a server mate. And he's been thinking about coming back in, and he's not sure about what he wants to do. And I was like, like we could do something together. Like we can go do some project, and that kind of stuff always goes faster when you've got 2 people on it. Gathering materials and any kind of repetitive block placing that does happen in like skyscrapers and apartment buildings and modern city builds, then we can work on something like that. And there's also some infrastructure stuff. I want to take a look and see what other kind of things I can do on the server that might be needed. Our end is a mess. Like we don't have any end gateways. I've got to fight the dragon like 20 times, not me, but like the server. And then once we're done with that, we're going to not fight the dragon anymore. And that leaves the end island as like a potential build area, community area for something or multiple things, which I think would be great. We're going to continue to reset the outer end islands as we need to for like elytra and shulker boxes and whatnot. But a shulker box farm is another one, because I feel like I'm going to need that at the sci-fi zone, because the sci-fi zone for me is going to be a lot of personal farms. And I think rather than having like giant sorting systems and chests going down these huge tunnels, I'd like to have like shulker box loaders coming out of my ears and just have like one chest with a bunch of shulker boxes in it, and that's all I need. Like I'm kind of done with these large bulk systems. So that's kind of like where I'm thinking as far as the Citadel goes. But outside of that, I'm actually going to start a snapshot world, because now that, as you mentioned earlier, that the new drop features are coming to Java, I want to mess with them on Java. I much prefer the Java experience, and I can also pop in some Fabric shaders, because usually the Fabric snapshot stuff is right on top of things, and so you can often get a couple of very basic mods going for that. So I'm going to try and mess around with copper golems and shelves and explore the technical stuff. I still haven't really messed with happy ghasts, although the Citadel could easily be updated to 1.21.8 now that it's been out for a little bit. I'm sure all the mods have caught up, but I also want to get in and experience that fog that you mentioned, and whether or not I like it, and see what that's going to be like on Snapshot. So now that I know I will be easily able to finish West Hill in August, I don't feel so pressed that I have to do the exact same thing every day on stream. Like, I'm going to work in a couple different things, and I think the snapshots are going to be really fun.
Yeah, it makes sense. And yeah, probably good that you don't want to update until you've finished West Hill, because the fog effect could very well change your opinion of what that area looks like. I think you don't have to worry too much if you're using shaders, and as far as I'm aware, there are a bunch of client-side mods that will allow you to affect that kind of distance fog anyway, so I'm sure there's a fix out there for you if you decide you don't like it, but it would be kind of a shame to be like, well, I can't really see half my town with the clarity that I had when I was building it in the first place. So it'd actually be quite interesting to hear whether you find it adds to the effect of what you're trying to do with West Hill, or if it sort of muddies things in the distance where you were used to things being a bit more vibrant.
I'm actually looking forward to some of the drop changes, removing some mods that I use. Like, some of the mods that I use have come a little bit redundant with some new features that are coming. So like, it's going to be fun to explore the snapshots, learn about these new features, and like, actually, it's either better than the mod, or like, I just don't need one more mod to monitor and update every time I want to update the server, so I can turf this one and just replace it with new vanilla functionality. So I'm hoping to discover that kind of stuff as well. But yeah, I'm planning on finishing West Hill before we do any major updates to the server. No one that I've spoken to on the server is champing at the bit for Happy Gas, and that's the only thing that's really in the latest update that would be of any consequence, I think. I can't think of anything else that would really affect us. So yeah, well, the Happy Guest I can see being something I might want for the sci-fi build, floating builds, like things that are going to be up in the air. I can see that being pretty handy. So I'm probably going to look into that once we actually get to that sci-fi zone.
Yeah, well, I've been using them to great effect in the Windy City on Minecraft Survival Guide, which is on 121.8, and I've sort of gotten used to how foggy the environment looks right now, and I am filling it up with color where I can, because I was working on a few creative designs that I ended up starting in Survival for some colorful terraced houses, basically a bunch of small houses side by side sharing a party wall, using all of the different types of wood color. Since there are such a diverse range of wood colors in the game now, you can get like greens and blues from things like unstripped bamboo, like bamboo that you haven't turned into planks yet, and warped wood, and you get really deep reds with mangrove and crimson, and then of course all of the more natural wood colors. Even cherry sort of fits in with this now, because by mixing and matching some of these and just creating a 5x5 area of stripped logs, and then, another 5x5 area of a different material, and then just kind of hiding the divide between them with a row of slabs, I came up with these really cute terraced houses, inspired, I think, by some of the houses I've seen in Brighton, where I live, but also some of the canal-side houses in Amsterdam, and some of the terraces in San Francisco. I wanted something that could be placed on uneven terrain, but terrain that sort of like dips ever so slightly, and so you could have some of them offset by a block vertically or horizontally, just so they could kind of stand apart from each other. But I wanted to start building something a bit more definitive in the Windy City and stop sort of hedging around the idea of actually building something here. So yeah, I started dropping these in. I've now started a second row of them that's in a completely different area surrounding the central station, so that now I've got, potentially the same architect has worked on multiple sets of houses within different neighborhoods of this city, and, you can kind of tie it into the fiction of the world a little bit. I plan on connecting the two eventually, but they are quite a distance apart from each other right now. And I found that it's a very easy formula to just drop in and do in Survival. Really what I was looking for was something that I could plan a couple of ideas in Creative, but then just carry on with the same formula in Survival instead of having to copy screenshots beat for beat, which is what I've been doing previously with Survival Guide, because I don't use mods like Lightmatica to drop in blueprints, and I find sometimes if I don't have a set formula to work from, or if I haven't taken measurements of everything beforehand, I'll make something that's off by a block from my creative plans just because I didn't count properly in the screenshot. It was difficult to count a tiling texture like stone, how many blocks there were in a row or something. And so, yeah, I've ended up with something that It's just simple 5-block wide houses. Probably won't be able to do much with the interior because it'll be a 3x5 space in there with it being 7 blocks deep. And yeah, like it's just going to be something that feels like it can build up decoration, start to influence the building style in this area, and ultimately something that was tall. Each of them is 3 houses high, basically, and so I wanted to make sure that there was some verticality to it, which meant that the Happy Ghast turned out to be a really good addition, because now I can hover up to the areas where I want to put in trapdoors for windows, or I've got lots of little hanging features, like there are decorated pots on chains, there are a lot of lanterns hanging from different things, there are shrubs and bits and pieces and different window details that I wanted to do. And having a Happy Ghast nearby when I can get them to come down for long enough that I can get on them is actually quite a useful thing to have around when I don't want to just scaffold up and fall off every so often and, deal with the usual builder's woes and gripes of working with vertical distance. But yeah, honestly, having the Happy Ghast for this has really helped, and I'm starting to get the hang of them, starting to press shift a little bit less when I want them to descend and that kind of thing. So overall, I'm pretty happy with how these have turned out so far.
I think they look really fun. In particular, I like the one where you've gone back along either the X or the Z axis by a block. So like it staggers the depth of them. That's really effective. And I like the more intense pops of color too, like the stripped, warped hyphae, the bamboo that's stripped, as you mentioned, and also the pale oak wood looks really, really good. This is the kind of thing where like using white as a wood is just so useful for accents, for dividers, for really neutral trim that goes with everything. So then like it doesn't really matter as long as the tone of the block it's next to has got enough contrast. It just kind of goes with everything. And it's really, really cool. And the cherry wood too. Cherry wood too looks good. In some of the screenshots it's a little bit shadowed, but yeah, in the other ones you can really see how pink it is. It's great.
Yeah, I've found that it helps to have the darker colors down at street level where the sunlight isn't going to reach in like a crowded city, and so I've just gone dark, medium, light on all of the tiers of the build, and yeah, I think it builds up really easily from there if you keep those kind of basic rules in mind and you don't shy away from putting really strong color contrasts next to each other, because like the base level of some of the apartments here is like it's cherry or dark oak next to warped next to the bamboo, and it kind of like alternates rapidly in terms of like color and saturation and everything. And I think all in all it came together really well, and it's a formula that I could easily repeat elsewhere if I was sort of stuck for ideas and be like, you know what, I'll just build another little residential district here. I'll build another couple of houses. I could even have them back to back if I wanted to, or like the back half of this is really just like the blocked out walls and no other features right now, because I'm not sure if I want to build something on the back of it or if I want to do some balconies and like overlooking a garden space or a park or something like that. So I'm leaving my options open. But as far as the facades for these goes, and they are completely surrounded by blocks, so I've had to light up the interiors in creative ways, but overall I'm really happy with the fact that these are now in place in the city, and it looks like the Windy City is now more than just a gateway and some Ghast parking.
It adds population too, because like every layer looks like a different person decorated and or lived there. So
yeah,
instead of one building, each building looks like 3 occupants, potentially 3 families, or depending on how you go, if you ended up with like doing shops or something in your city, then like the bottom floor could be some sort of shop, and then the top 2 floors could be like residence for either the people that own that shop or just residents in general. Like just it's got a lot of flexibility. And when you're doing something like that, it's great to have like a system that has variety, but then something that you can repeat and add density without adding density to the mind share, if that makes sense, like in terms of all the things you have to think about when you're designing a large area like this. It's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I wanted to divide these up into actual living spaces, I could get more space out of them by either having like 2 front doors or designing the interior more like it's a Tetris block kind of shape. So like one of the houses only has like 2 of the stories, and then the third house is like gonna have the top floor entirely or something like that. The penthouse apartment kind of approach to it. So yeah, I could do a lot more with it, but I found that using copper bulbs in the upstairs windows was really great as well for the sort of attic windows. I like the idea of having those so that It feels like there is some life going on there, and creates a fun stained glass window kind of effect. Gives me a fun use for copper bulbs. So yeah, bits and pieces like that are starting to come to the fore, where I haven't used things like copper bulbs or frog lights or lightning rods too much for detail, and now those are popping out. And all this building is really making up for the fact that on Misadventures, I'm really going in for the dungeon running kind of stuff. So I've joined the Road Builders Guild recently, so I can start building roads to and from the areas that I'm actually building anything. But the Infernal Descent dungeon has my attention right now. I've done a couple of solo runs, and at this point, I'm just looking in there for lore and clues for different stuff that's going to be happening later. So not much to report from Misadventures, which means we can get on into the news this week. And oh boy, is there a lot of it. Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 25W31A has arrived, and it brings with it the copper chest, the copper golem statue blocks, copper equipment, and the shelf. Now, broadly speaking, these features are identical, at least as far as the changelog goes, to the versions added to Bedrock Edition in recent previews we've covered on the show, so we're going to skim over the details of those and return to discussing the copper golem and the shelf in our main discussion this week. If you can head over to Minecraft.net or our show notes at thespawnchunks.com, you'll find a link to the changelog if you need to catch up on any of those features. But moving on to the newer additions in this snapshot, there are new copper features, including lightning rods now oxidizing like other copper blocks, and the lightning rod on the copper golem. They've also added copper horse armor to go along with the other copper equipment. It has the same loot table and chance of generating as iron horse armor, and an armor toughness of 4. New accessibility features have been added also. The attack and destroy and use item and place block keybinds are now toggleable, meaning they can be set to either hold or toggle in the controls screen. They've added the invert mouse X option to the mouse settings screen, which inverts the mouse's X axis, and added sprint window option to the controls screen, which represents the time window in ticks, where double tapping the forward key will activate sprint. Some additional changes in 25W31A. Monster spawn eggs now have a tooltip warning when the difficulty is set to peaceful. The mob will no longer spawn for 1 tick when an attempt is made to use the spawn egg in peaceful mode. The debug screen has also been reworked to be less cluttered and more configurable. There are changes to world loading and the spawn chunks, as we alluded to at the top of the show. A dimension that has any player activity, force-loaded chunks, active portals, or ender pearls in flight will be considered active and will keep processing chunks and entities as of this snapshot, where previously this would only apply if a player was in the dimension or a chunk was force-loaded. So now the chunks you've stayed loaded in the overworld will still be active even if you're in the nether or the end. To go into a bit more detail about world loading and the spawn chunks, the concept of fixed spawn chunks has been removed. The game will ensure that the following chunks are fully loaded before the player joins or the server starts, in the same way as spawn chunks formerly were. That's chunks loaded by the force load command, chunks active due to nether portal activity, ender pearls thrown in single player, but that's single player only, the small area of chunks around the player in a single player world, and chunks required to assign the global world spawn, but only on world creation. The world loading screen with the little square that slowly fills up now shows the chunks that the player is about to be placed into, rather than the chunks loaded around world spawn. And the loading screen additionally now includes a progress bar, which accounts for all kinds of chunk loading as mentioned above. The developers have noted that spawn chunks incur a memory and performance cost for all players and have outlived their initial technical purpose of keeping the spawn area ready for players to quickly join into. However, we also want to recognize that spawn chunks have enabled a multitude of clever contraptions and farms throughout the years, so simply removing them without having other mechanics in the game to enable these designs was never really an option. They now believe that the niche held by spawn chunks has now been filled by alternative methods of chunk loading, such as portals or ender pearls, particularly with the changes in this snapshot to how the game loads those chunks before the world starts ticking. Some changes have been made to sounds as well. The Happy Ghast is now audible from 64 blocks away. Sounds for chests now play at a lower volume. The volume at which a sound is played now respects the sound source volume value, and the voice and speech sound source has been rephrased to narrator/voice. The debug screen, accessible by pressing F3 like it was before, can now be accessed from everywhere in the game, not only when in a game world. It now displays less information by default, but can be configured. A new debug options screen can be opened by pressing F3 and F5 simultaneously. This can now be used to configure which debug information should be displayed. For each item, you can choose if it should be turned off, visible when the debug screen F3 is open, or if it should always be visible even when the debug screen is closed. Some debug features that were previously available, like chunk border rendering or entity hitbox rendering, can now also be toggled through this debug options screen. And some debug features that were not previously available to the community, like Octree visualization, are now accessible through the debug options screen. The state of the debug options screen is saved between launches of the game, and the debug options screen has two preset profiles, which are default, which resets everything to the default state, or performance, which shows simple performance metrics, including the FPS meter always being visible on screen. The developer's note here says, quote, "Previously, the information gathering every frame to render the F3 screen had a significant performance cost, so opening the screen to check your FPS noticeably dropped the FPS. Now, checking your FPS in performance profile should not affect game performance." Some accessibility features got added in this snapshot as well. A button leading to the controls screen has been added to the accessibility settings screen. The auto jump option as well as sneak and sprint toggles have been removed from the accessibility settings screen. The show subtitles option has been rephrased to closed captions to more accurately describe what it does. And die colors now have updated icons, similar to what we saw in Bedrock Edition in previous weeks. The goal with these is to enhance visual cohesion across the die set, while maintaining distinct shapes to support colorblind accessibility. Performance improvements include entity rendering order being improved for significantly better performance. You should notice much smoother gameplay in areas with lots of mobs, such as mob farms. FPS won't improve much if most of your lag comes from things other than entities, like playing with high render distance while not being near many mobs. The developer's note here says this change is quite big, and we would not be surprised if we introduced some ordering issues with this. For example, part of mob rendering too early or too late, and this is not visible or is visually broken. Please play around with this and report any bugs you encounter. Technical changes in 25W31A. Pack versions now have minor versions, so you'll notice a decimal point in Data Pack version 82.0 and Resource Pack version 65.0. For more details on the changes in these packs, which are mostly in support of the new game features added in this snapshot, we encourage you to check out the changelog article this week. Notable bug fixes in 25W31A include thunder volume not being affected by the weather volume settings. I am very thankful for that change personally. Players being able to be kicked for being idle whilst viewing the end credits. A bunch of fixes for debug view, a bunch of fixes for mip-mapped textures that remained unused, and a handful of hard-coded item drops like pumpkin seeds from carved pumpkins, honeycomb from bee nests, and mob heads from charged creeper explosions are now data-driven with loot tables. There are many more bug fixes and other details in this snapshot, so you can find a link to the full changelog article in this week's show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
So I know we did a little joke at the beginning about the spawn chunks, but I'm generally curious now. It looks like I'm going to have to find a way to load the Iron Farm on the Citadel with either an Ender Pearl chunk loader or maybe using the chunk load command if that's what we decide to do on the server, because that's going to just be not working when I'm not around. And I'm curious. They mentioned a performance issue or increase from removing the spawn chunks and them being outdated, and that's fair. I mean, like I think the 16-year-old game. Making it more efficient is a fantastic way to move forward. I'm wondering if upcoming vibrant visuals on Java has anything to do with making performance a bit more streamlined to hopefully allow more players at different ranges of hardware to have access to what they want, which is the default graphic setting to be vibrant visuals on Java Edition.
I would not be surprised. Honestly, like anywhere that Java Edition can scrimp and save on performance is going to be a good thing, especially considering Bedrock has long been outperforming Java Edition in terms of what it can do visually, like the render distance ranges and that kind of thing. So yeah, I would not be surprised, even though they are refactoring rendering code and apparently multi-threading it so that gameplay is going to be separate from visuals. That all still has to happen on the same device, right? So it does make sense that there is some kind of connection between the two and that any performance they can save means putting less load on the CPU in general. But yeah, like changes to the spawn chunks really are kind of a surprise, but they did recently reduce the size of spawn chunks in an update, I think, of 1.20. So I've been Ender Pearl chunk loading my iron farm for a while because I built it in the general area of the spawn chunks back in the beginning of 1.20, and then when it changed since then, I have had to make a couple of changes to make sure that it's either in the radius of the smaller spawn chunks that they had by default, or in this case now is loaded with an Ender Pearl because it wasn't producing iron the rest of the time. Yeah, it's interesting because spawn chunks have never been a thing on Bedrock Edition either. So to an extent, this brings Java Edition and Bedrock Edition a little bit closer to parity in that respect, but I don't believe chunk loaders from portals or thrown ender pearls are a thing on Bedrock Edition either. So I wonder if that's got something to do with Bedrock Edition's overall performance, and they're trying to maybe bring it a bit more in line with what happens for the average Java Edition player.
Yeah, I don't know that the average player is going to be aware of chunk loaders unless they're watching content, on YouTube from technical people that are explaining how to do it and why it works. I don't know anything in game that kind of tells you that you can load chunks in that way. But I also don't know anything in game that tells you about the spawn chunks, right? Like that's something you have to look up under the hood for Java. Like having an iron farm for years built in the spawn chunks. If you wanted an always running iron farm on your server or on your world, when the world is loaded, like you'd have to know that from elsewhere. The game doesn't say that's a thing. So I think that it makes sense. It's it's an end of an era, I guess. And just I am wondering if in a year's time, like when new players come to Minecraft and they're just kind of like, why is this podcast that I've just discovered and am listening to at the behest of my friends? Why is that called spawn chunks? Can someone explain that to me? Like our long-time listeners and anybody that has played the game for more than a couple of months is going to know. But as the game continues, that knowledge is going to be a thing of the past eventually. Like I'm sure there's things that you and I probably take for granted that new players just experience and don't realize, oh, this used to be not like this, or this was like the Nether, for example. Like going into the Nether as a current player, that's just how it is. It's not even new anymore, right? And I'm wondering if that's something that will happen to players for the spawn chunks.
Yeah, it's one of those legacy things like light levels for mob spawning being 7 that we just took for granted for so long before really reconsidering, does this need to exist? And especially now that Mojang has made a few changes that mean chunk loading can happen in a variety of other ways when a player is not present. I think it makes perfect sense on paper. It's just very strange as somebody who's been living that Minecraft life for 10 plus years and like you said, has a podcast named after the phenomenon. I did jokingly put in our show notes that when they say they want to recognize that spawn chunks have enabled a multitude of clever contraptions and farms throughout the years, there is no mention of a beloved podcast. But no, we know that they love us and hopefully appreciate us, even though we poke holes in some of the stuff they do occasionally. So moving on to some of the other stuff in this snapshot, I think, honestly, the thing that hit me the most when I was exploring this is the changes to debug, is the changes to the F3 experience. And I think a fantastic change, like just seeing the level of control you have over it, the things that you can toggle. You can now just have the player location data display on screen when you hit F3. So if you don't want all of the extra information about what version of Minecraft you're running and all of your technical specifications down one side and all of the block you're looking at data and all of the height values and things like that, you can just look at your coordinates. I think it also displays stuff like chunk data, like what block of the chunk you're standing in and what region of the world you're in and that kind of thing. But it's a fairly concise range of data. And you could have that even permanently on screen if you wanted to. Although I still think that the Vanilla Tweaks Coordinates HUD is still my favorite implementation of having coordinates permanently on screen. But like on Bedrock Edition, how they always, if you toggle coordinates on, it's always printed in the top left just on its own, just like the X, Y, and Z of the player. So I think it's really good to have a measure of control over that. It will also help me from a tutorial perspective if I want to highlight specific pieces of information that the debug screen shows you, like light levels and redstone power levels and that kind of stuff. I can quickly open the F3 debug, make sure it just shows that information for the block that I'm looking at. And that way I don't have to like zoom in on that part of the video and highlight the text to make sure that people watching know what I'm looking at, because it'll be the only thing on screen. And so I think that's quite good. I think that it's really good to have a bit of that under the control of the player again and allow that to be customizable. Even the fact that it can be toggled always on so that you don't have to constantly press F3 to check up on stuff if you're debugging a mod or, some kind of test thing that you're doing on a snapshot world. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I actually use the Better F3 mod. I'll have a link in our show notes for anybody that's wanting to check it out. And it allows you to decide what F3 information is displayed and also change the color, which I thought was really handy as well. With the way that they're doing it in the snapshot, separating out the stuff that you don't want does the same thing. Like it creates visual clarity by separating out the information. And for me, Better F3, I was able to put like bright yellow for coordinates. I was able to put different colors for biome and stuff like that, which I thought was great. Right now, I actually don't use it that much because the map mod that I use, Zero's Minimap and map mods, the Minimap actually gives you the option to have your coordinates, your XYZ, and the time of day displayed directly under the minimap. It's just a little bit of text under the minimap, and I have come to rely on it. Like, I love that I don't have to put a big F3 screen up to show my coordinates, and that's a concern that I have as a content creator. But also, like, just as a quick glance, like, I don't need the people viewing to be able to read the numbers, but I want to be able to read the numbers. I find it's a great way to quickly discern where I am and like what block is what, but also the time of day I've found really, really helpful. And like, I sleep at 18:32, like that. I can absolutely get to the bed at like the exact time I need to create a better visual experience as I'm playing. And I'm curious to see what other things are going to come to vanilla Minecraft that are very similar to mods, because really I don't use the F3 screen that much. I could get rid of this mod. Like I depending on what options I decide to keep in the new snapshot, I might not need Better F3 in the future. It's just one less thing to continue to update as the versions march forward, right? So I think it's great. I think it's great for accessibility. I think it's great for readability. I think it's great for not overwhelming new players, like just strip out the stuff that you don't need. I love that you can have the coordinates up on screen. I agree. I think that the HUD from Vanilla Tweaks looks better. Like, it's definitely a much nicer experience. In the same way that having your coordinates on screen in Bedrock is in a weird place. Like, it's kind of like in the top left side of the screen. I guess that's where the little puppet thing goes to. But like, I've never understood that UI decision. I really feel that, especially now that they've got the location bar or the locator bar at the bottom, I feel like having a heads up display there of your location coordinates is just a natural next step.
Yeah, it's certainly a place players are looking quite a lot because you're always checking on your life meter and what's in your hotbar and that kind of thing. So it makes sense. But either way, I think just having a configurable F3 screen was not on my bucket list, and it's definitely there now. Like, I think it's genuinely a really good change. We've talked in the past about certain features, how we would wish for them to be configurable if we would make any changes to them. And I think this is one that nobody really expected to be configurable anytime soon. So I think really cool that it is. Moving back onto the features that were added in this one, though, I can take or leave copper horse armor in the same way that I can take or leave copper equipment, really, in general, but I think it's nice to have a bit more variety. The thing that really struck me, no pun intended, because of their relationship with lightning, is the oxidization of lightning rods, because I think the excuse for them previously has been, well, if they're getting struck by lightning and that removes the oxidation, then you don't need to worry too much about them oxidizing anyway, because they'll just look fresh the rest of the time. But now I've seen them in game, and of course they can be waxed, so they can be kept at a certain oxidation level anyway. I think they're very pretty, and I think they'll make an excellent decorative detail. I started putting lightning rods in the apartment blocks that I was building in the Windy City, and I thought, yes, some of these are going to end up oxidizing once that feature makes it to default vanilla, and I think it's going to be really fun to have a variety of colors to work with, especially for people who are using them for like small-scale copper pipes that maybe want a bit of corrosion to them and that kind of thing. So generally, I think that's, again, a change that I didn't expect to need, but makes perfect sense considering that the copper golem has a lightning rod style bobble on its head and is clearly something that they wanted to put in as a parity with the rest of the copper block range that just didn't make any sense when copper lightning rods were added in the first place. So I think that's really good.
Especially because you can place them sideways. Like, as someone that's looking forward to doing more technical looking stuff and sci-fi looking stuff, having different colors, the bright, kind of teal oxidized copper, like that's going to look like a wire. Like I can make that look like some sort of connecting conduit or something like that in some of my new builds. And I think that's going to be cool to have different colors, and that teal goes so well in contrast with the full copper shiny look, right? And if you wax them both, then I guess you don't have to wax the teal one, but if you've got them set in the way that you want, then you could even have rusty looking wires. Like it's going to be really, really interesting. The one thing I obviously would like more control over would be like the tip of it, like the knob, the knob on the end would be nice to be able to, if you connected them together, if it was like a connected texture. But yeah, I think there's definitely some possibilities for sure, because I've used them as candle holders in West Hill. Like I've got one right side up and one upside down, so that the knob is on the bottom, looks like a base, and then at the top it's the right width for a candle to go on top of it as well. So that's cool. Again, different color candlesticks if you want, around your builds. Your turquoise cathedral can now have matching candlesticks everywhere.
Yeah, and if you're putting them outside, then they are a fantastic time since last thunderstorm sign, I suppose, as well. So
nice.
Yeah, I'm sure some people will end up using them for that. But yeah, overall, I think the main thing we wanted to talk about this week was the Copper Golem and shelves being implemented in Java Edition now. So we're going to save that for the main discussion. I do have some thoughts about it, having played around a little bit in the Java Edition snapshot. But before that, we wanted to cover some listener emails. So it's time to move on into chunk mail for this week. As always, if you'd like to email the show, the listener email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. We're not going to rebrand it, don't worry. Even though the spawn chunks have been removed from Java Edition, spawnchunkmail@gmail.com remains the email address. Joel is going to read us this first one.
Our email this week is from Miss Turk7, auto-sorting inventories at a cost. Hi, Pix and Joel. After the reveal of the auto-sorting Copper Golem and the hot-swapping shelf, it's clear to me that the main focus of this next Minecraft drop is to give players better ways to manage their inventories. However, while the current editions address solutions for centralized sorting systems, we haven't seen anything to improve active sorting within the user interface except for the bundle. Auto sorting has been requested on this podcast for quite some time now, so how would Minecraft want to implement it? I suggest locking it behind a requirement of a certain amount of experience points and then requiring the cost of some to trigger it. In addition to the sorting going from left to right in sequential and readable manner, it could give players an opportunity to learn and depend less on automation. This would ensure that it does entirely replace traditional sorting methods while still being useful to use sparingly. What do you think about that? Mr. 7 is alive.
Oh, thank goodness for that. I'd be very concerned for you if you weren't. Yeah, as regards this email, frankly, I don't really like the idea of it relying on XP levels. And it's something that's been implemented in mods, you think sort of like inventory tweaks and stuff like that, without much fuss and without there being a need to balance a quality of life thing like inventory sorting with gameplay, such as requiring you to, earn XP, experience orbs. They didn't say necessarily levels, but like experience points in order to get hold of features like this. I think inventory sorting is much more valuable in early game and mid game because you don't yet have enough resources available to you to access stuff like long-term storage systems. You don't have maybe enough iron that you can build up a large sort of system of hopper filters, and you don't have access to shulker boxes yet, so you can't really do that kind of accessible storage. So when you're at the early stage where you're still scrambling for experience so you can enchant, combine, and repair your equipment, it would be kind of a drain on the player to also have to use that experience for inventory sorting. Especially since you're sacrificing some experience points or maybe even entire experience levels for something that feels very temporary. Like if you're enchanting a piece of armor, at least you know it's more permanent, right? You're at least going to be carrying that around with you for a while versus, losing a couple of levels just so your inventory can be sorted and possibly even not have, the perfect sorting rules for you. It's interesting reflecting on this, having been part of this Minecraft Minute project that I'm doing on Twitch, where a bunch of people set up a server that only one person can log into at a time, but we all control the same character, and we're all playing Minecraft for 60 seconds at a time and trying to stitch together this complete Minecraft playthrough with a bunch of different approaches. Nobody can agree how to manage their hotbar. And whenever I log in, stuff is always in a different place to how I would normally have it. There isn't even food or torches there half of the time. And so, yeah, player preference matters so much in this game, especially, as we've remarked in the past, for people who've been playing it for over 15 years at this stage. And how does the game know how you want your inventory sorted? Do you have to conform to the game's idea of what sorted looks like? Or, how do you have it sorted alphabetically, by material color, by block shape, by category? Like, how does the game know, I think, is the hardest part of defining any sorting behavior like this. And I think at that point, the idea that it costs you experience is frankly a little bit, it's either by the by, or it's sort of a bit of a slap in the face to players who are trying to keep hold of that experience for something that they want to enchant later.
Yeah, I agree with the whole cost of experience thing. If something as useful as sorting the player inventory, and I think about that as above the hotbar. Like, I don't think about the hotbar as being something that would ever be auto-sorted. I feel like that's not something that usually happens in other games, so I don't think it would happen here if it was to happen at all. But not having enough resources to do that sorting, like either not having enough XP as an early player, or having enough, like you're at 30 levels in a little bit, and you don't want to sort your inventory to then drop below 30 levels for the next enchant. Like, that would not feel good. It would be annoying, honestly. And to have something that is so widespread in other survival games at a cost in Minecraft, I just don't think would feel good to players that are familiar with that kind of stuff. Lots of other games do this, and I don't think it takes away from the gameplay experience. I would fully expect a sorting button in the Minecraft inventory to take those 3 rows of inventory and arrange them alphabetically, left to right, top to bottom. Like, that's just how I would expect it to do. I could maybe see an option to do the opposite, like maybe have it run the other way, but like right to left. But, honestly, I think that default, most games do this. I've been playing Grounded 2 a little bit on Xbox, and as someone that's new to the game and learning the different items, learning the different gear, being able to quickly sort both your inventory and a chest that you're looking at is very, very helpful. Same thing in Satisfactory. Satisfactory has a lot of items. It can get very cluttered as your inventory gets larger and larger and larger as you expand it during the game as part of your, power-ups. And to quickly sort it to find the thing that you're looking for is great. And I guess more useful for new players. But as a new Minecraft player comes in, we all have been complaining about not that we are complaining about new blocks and new things in the game, but there are so many new things introduced in the last 3 years, even in Minecraft, that having the ability to be overwhelmed and control that as a new player, I think would be welcome. And I will note that both Grounded and Satisfactory have separate inventories for your gear. So like when you sort your inventory, it doesn't affect the hotbar. And anything that you have on your person is usually on like a separate window. It's usually like a picture of the character, and then you've got like a sword slot and a shield slot and a boot slot and all that kind of stuff. Similar to Minecraft armor, but it also includes weapons and stuff. And then the hotbar is totally separate. That's almost like a hot swapping kind of situation for Grounded. Same thing with Satisfactory. It's the hotbar is not at all related to your gears and your weapons. It's all about like abilities and building tools. Your scroll wheel is what rolls through your stuff on Satisfactory for the number of things that you have in your hands. And so I think that it would be cool for the building inventory, to be able to do that. And for me, even late game, like when I go to texture stuff and I've got an entire inventory full of like 2 different kinds of stone, stairs and slabs, I've got wood blocks, I've got all the different grasses and firefly bushes and ferns and bone meal and extra bones for bone meal. Like there's a lot. And I find very often I have to switch out the hotbar. Like I need my shovel now and I need my pickaxe now, because what I want on the hotbar is a lot of the options for building. But very often I have to pop into my inventory and try to find something that's not on the hotbar. And I end up like, you do that little thing with the mouse where you're like, where is that thing? Like I'm looking for the shape. And if I knew that I could click a button and know that ferns are going to be like somewheres in the top row because they start with F, like I think that would be helpful. But that's just me. I do think it would be terrible to have it cost anything. Like I think straight up just, having it be an ability, I don't think it takes away from Minecraft at all. I think having a sorting feature in the inventory is really kind of like bringing Minecraft up to speed with other survival games right now.
Here's an interesting fringe case in alphabetical item sorting, though. What does it do with renamed items? let's say, for example, that you named your sword the Punisher or something like that, and it's a diamond sword. If you auto-sort your inventory alphabetically, does it go to D for diamond sword? Does it go to T for the? Do you now have to name your like equipment Punisher, comma the, like you would in an alphabetical like library situation, right? Like there's so many little interesting fringe cases like that I think is possibly one of the reasons why. Like in any other game, like I played Stardew Valley and Terraria, where they both have inventory auto-sorting options, but I don't think you have the capacity to rename anything in that the way you can do that dynamically with an anvil or a name tag in Java Edition. So I'm curious if that's one of the reasons why alphabetical. I'd be interested in hear how mods handle that stuff as well. Like if they do it by the item category, if they do it by like the code for the item, like the item name tag, as opposed to the physical name, the display name that it's given. If they do it based on the sort of item code for it, that'd be interesting. To kind of maybe come around to a more positive outlook on this idea, though, I can see some players being quite happy with having a useful late game experience, because we've all talked about in the past having hundreds and hundreds of XP levels because you've got mending on all of your equipment. If you're a careful player, you don't really need to use or lose any equipment at any point, and so you end up just accumulating levels from killing the occasional mob, villager trading, XP farms where you get a little excess once you're done repairing your tools. And I think having some kind of late game use for that, besides just renaming things, would be kind of interesting to have. So I don't mind the idea of there being a late game use for XP in that respect. And inventory sorting would potentially still be kind of valuable, like you said, when you're taking on large-scale end-game builds. But again, I'm not certain XP is the right solution for it, but I like the ingenuity behind this. I like the notion of how can we sort of kill two birds with one stone? How can we introduce an interesting feature but still gamify it to an extent? I think it's just how much you gamify it versus how much it restricts players from using it in other situations where it'd be helpful. That's the thing you need to be aware of balancing.
Yeah. As someone that has had Transformers on the brain lately, I like the idea of turning bottles of enchanting into blocks of enchanting or blocks of experience, and just having essentially energon cubes everywhere to store up as something that you can build with and create with, as opposed to just having nothing to do with it. But then we have to also manage that block.
Yes.
So, and the moment it's introduced, like stairs and slabs in experience blocks, when like it's a slippery slope for sure. But
absolutely.
But I can see the need for something. Like I know what you mean, and I was like, why am I always low on experience on the Citadel lately? And it's because I've got a mod, and when I label the shulker boxes, when I put the little item on them, it costs levels to do that.
Right.
So that's why I'm always hovering around like 7 or 8 levels, because I go and repair stuff. I pick up 20 levels, but then as I add something to a shulker box, or I reorganize the way things are going as I move things around Westhill, I'm losing a couple levels whenever I do that.
Yeah, well, I suppose to an extent that is you using XP on sorting things, but in a very different way, right? It's sort of the more physical storage of like the renaming of shulker boxes and whatnot. Well, we are going to talk about the other things that have happened in inventory sorting lately, which is copper golems and shelves, which have finally made their way to the latest Java Edition snapshot. And I thought we could talk a little bit about what we think of them now. We've had a couple of weeks to sit and think about how we would use them in our vanilla worlds, but also how they compare to the versions we've already seen in Bedrock Edition. Because I personally, when I jumped into the snapshot, having played around with both in Bedrock Edition, I noticed a couple of changes, or at least a couple of implementations for Java Edition that I would like maybe a bit more parity with the versions we've already had on Bedrock Edition. I'm not sure how your experience has been so far, Joel, but are you thinking the same?
I haven't had time to mess with them physically. I've just been kind of like following snapshot videos and your experience with them. I'm definitely excited for all of this stuff to come to Java Edition. Like I'm curious to mess around with it in my Java snapshots later this week. And I'm specifically the shelves. Like I think the shelves over the copper golems for me. Like I think it's probably because I have seen the copper golems, in Bedrock, but the shelves having hopper interaction to me, you just mentioned it last week on the show, and we didn't know it was coming, is really cool. I did not expect that, and I'm looking forward to exploring what that means in terms of loading shelves, in terms of unloading shelves, in terms of I'm pretty sure you can move shelves in Bedrock, but you can't in Java Edition. So like they're not, you can't move them with a piston. So I just thought like how neat would it be if like you could load up a shelf and then press a button and have it retract over hoppers and then drain out if desired, instead of having to always have it happen. But I guess you could also lock the hopper. That could be a thing too. So I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of little contraptions could be useful, because again, what I was talking about earlier with my inventory and being able to sort it, as I'm working on things like the landscaping around the river and then also the custom cliffs, like I tend to need different things in my inventory if I'm riverside versus working up on a cliff, and there's not enough room to have both. Or if there is enough room, it's just really convoluted. It's really hard to see what you need. So having the ability to hot swap out a series of blocks, stacks of blocks, for cliff building, and you go back over to the shelf and you swap out for riverbanks, and just like flip back and forth as you go along. If that's not a terribly difficult thing to set up at a build site, I can see that being super useful in Java, especially if you can load them from behind with hoppers, like something like grass, ferns, bone meal, the things that I was going through a lot of, and like every 15 minutes on stream I'd have to like fly over and cut some more grass, or I'd have to stop what I was doing on one side of the river, either fly or swim across a fairly wide section of the river, get more bone meal, and then swim back across. It would be much easier to have a couple of things set up either on that side of the river, or something where I could just constantly have that being refilled close by.
Yeah, I think honestly, the thing that people in my stream chat who haven't seen the shelf already seemed wowed by is the ability to just swap your entire hotbar. Like people can immediately think of some interesting uses for that. And I actually tried out something that I suggested on the show last week but hadn't tried in the Bedrock version, which was loading up the shelf with your tools, like clones of like a diamond pickaxe, a diamond shovel, whatever else you need to work on the terrain around you, and then filling up any available space with a different set of blocks so that you could swap between having additional blocks in your hotbar that weren't part of your inventory already, and just be able to cycle those out. And you put food in the same place, you put torches in the same place, and that way you're not swapping your entire hotbar, you're just swapping the blocks that you want to change out. And I think that worked really well from my limited experience of it so far. I think doing that in survival and, setting it up so it was constantly adding new blocks for you is possible now that hopper interactions are a thing. I'm not certain how it would feel long term and how much hassle it would be for the convenience of it, but I do like the idea that it's possible. And again, there are so many other applications beyond just vanilla survival gameplay. The amount of minigame loadouts that you could do by having a hotbar swapper, you could mess around with all kinds of stuff like that in future. I still think having the ability to remove rows of your stored inventory, like your sort of 3 rows of player inventory above the hotbar, would be incredible for reducing time spent in inventory UI, either if there was a hotkey to swap those into your hotbar, or if a shelf was somehow able to take from the top row, the middle row, or the bottom row of your player inventory. I think that could be even more of a game changer than they already are. But as it stands, it's not that difficult to put your hotbar on a shelf, open your inventory, number key 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 while hovering over the stuff that you want to move down, and then put that on another shelf that's got, the full redstone power so it can take that row of your hotbar, and so on and so forth, right? I'm over the moon about hopper interactions. Genuinely, I think that's opening up the shelf to very exciting use cases for builders, because you could have a shelf refill from shulker boxes worth of materials that you brought over with you, and it can just have a few more stacks of stone waiting to go. It can have textural variety that you can add in just by right-clicking on a shelf real quick and swapping in those few blocks, and then almost using it like a painter's palette where you're going back for more red or more white or whatever you need to make the stuff possible. So I imagine like almost palette builds of them would be really interesting as an implementation for it. It's also not a solid block, so powering the shelf doesn't power and lock the hopper that it's attached to, which means that interaction becomes much less of a finicky hassle. You could have separate mechanisms both to power the shelf and to lock the hopper, so you could do all sorts of gadgetry with that, making sure that it loads or doesn't load stuff when it needs to. And items will drain out of shelves from hoppers in much the same way, so I think it's great that it has a full range of hopper interactions in that sense. Like you said, pushable shelves would be sort of next level stuff, and this could be a really interesting case to be made for pushable tile entities turning up in Java Edition sooner or later. But overall, yeah, I continue to be impressed by shelves as a feature. I think they've got so much potential. The fact that you can get Redstone signal output from them, like comparators can read them as well, so you can get an output signal based on how full it is. I think it's interesting that, like, a few people have pointed this out, the shelf interacts with the hotbar from right to left. So it fills up like 7 through 9 with a single shelf. It fills up 4 through 9 for 2 shelves, and then the entire hotbar with all 3. But then when it's adding items in using a hopper, it's adding them from left to right, because that's consistent with the behavior of hoppers filling up other containers. And some people are wondering, does that feel like a bit of a clash in terms of how the expected behavior is versus the outcome? Like, would you expect the shelf to fill your inventory from left to right in the same way that it fills from a hopper? And so there's a little bit of stuff that's esoteric maybe, or people are still trying to get used to with shelves, but I think that's sort of similar to behavior of bundles, where after you've had a bit of hands-on experience with it, it'll become second nature and it won't feel quite as jarring to people.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of getting used to it. Something that just dawned on me as we were talking about hoppers and shelves, like depending on how quickly the item is displayed, if you simply do a zigzag in your hopper chain, you could use the shelf as a display for there are items moving down through this hopper chain, because it would show up physically. Like you'd be able to see it. Right now, you'd have to walk up to a hopper and like look in it to see if an item was going through. And sometimes if it's going too fast, like you don't necessarily catch it. You have to look at the bottom hopper. But to actually see an item go through a shelf to indicate like, yeah, the farm is working. The stuff that you are bringing in is coming down through this hopper chain is a neat idea.
Depending on the way you set this up, you could have it display sets of banners where we've had those be discussed as like great interactions with shelves for like lettering, for like marquees and stuff. You could almost use it to like telegram somebody else and have like a short word or phrase, or like even with multiple shelves, it could decode on one side of a signal versus the other. And so once somebody sends a message on their side, through a very kind of complex system or just like a long chain of hoppers, you could have the same message pop in on somebody else's set of shelves with blank banners for the spaces and stuff like that. And so you could effectively use it as like a texting system on a server or something like that if you wanted to communicate, probably over short distances to begin with. But given what I've seen DocM do with wireless redstone technology this season of Hermitcraft, I think the sky's the limit for anybody who's technical enough. So I can only imagine just being able to text somebody in Minecraft and send like little banner emojis and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, well, even just yes and no, like they fit on one shelf, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like a 3 or 4 letter word is going to be child's play over a couple of shelves, if that. So yeah, no, really, really cool idea, I think. And so yeah, there's a couple of things that I have as a small like thing that I would want changed, like a couple of bugbears about the Java implementation of shelves. And the main thing being, if we're going to be using them for display stuff like this, if it's possible to do stuff like that, the items need to be displayed at the same scale as they are on Bedrock Edition. Right now on Bedrock Edition, they look bold, they look bright, they look kind of very, very present on the shelves. And I think it's the scale at which the items are being displayed. On Java Edition, the items are really scaled down, and it doesn't look quite as good to me. So I think it's much more attractive. It has way more decorative potential and potential for fun gadgetry stuff like we just described if the items are displaying as large as they feasibly can without clipping into each other in awkward ways.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that that's a difference on Java. Like I can't imagine that would be a technical limitation. And if it's A/B testing, I guess, maybe, like, hey, we're going to put them as one size on Bedrock and one size on Java and see what people think. Go with A, Mojang. Go with the first one. The first one is better. They look darker, and it's probably just because of the pixel density of the texture not being different, but being smaller, it's just going to look darker because it's denser. But I feel like they don't look as vibrant because they're not as big. And I could be wrong. They could also be displaying with a weird shadow in Java. I don't know. But for now, I agree with you. I think that they look better on shelf in Bedrock Edition. And I was excited about putting things like concrete blocks and light blocks and things like that in a long series of shelves. And it does not look like I would have the same sort of joy from that in Java at present. So hopefully they fix that.
Yeah. But even thinking about like with lights and concrete blocks and stuff like that, now that they have Hopper interactions, like animated progress bar, stuff like that, like is perfectly feasible. And I think they've got so much potential in that respect that they really want to spend some time fine tuning visually how they look and make them look as good as they reasonably can, I think. But that's really it for shelves as far as I'm concerned. I did play around a little bit with them visually. I think some of the decorative potential they have is great. I built a couple of like copper pipes because I was also testing the copper golem at the same time, and I wanted like a little surround for some of the stuff, and the new lightning rods, the oxidized lightning rods. And if you surround a vertical pipe with a bunch of dark oak shelves, I think it looks like some sort of industrial bracket kind of thing, in a similar way to how people use trapdoors for them now. Like, I think there's a lot of potential decoratively for them that way. But copper golems also had my attention naturally, and one of the first things I tested actually with copper golems, because this had been a concern in previous weeks, was how quickly an oxidized copper golem stops moving, because people were concerned that you wouldn't be able to use the fourth tier of golem, the fully oxidized one, without it just freezing up instantly. Because the changelog sort of implied that. It wasn't necessarily that delicately worded, but the answer is actually that they come to a stop very, very slowly, or it takes a very, very long time of them being active before it happens. I had somebody prompt me to, I think it was Wormbo, who's in our live chat, prompted me to use the entity data command to see if there was anything in there that explained how long the copper golem was going to take to age. And in-game ticks, it gave me a deadline of sorts, basically. It's like time until next age or something like that. And in a fresh world, which would have started from 0 ticks of in-game time, a golem spawned from an oxidized copper block. So this wasn't one that I had from a spawn egg or summoned in or anything like that. It should have been as naturally generated as it can be. It had about 500,000 ticks before the next stage would come around. And the game runs at 20 ticks per second, so that converts to roughly 25,000 seconds, or 416 minutes, or nearly 7 hours. So it's going to take a lot of in-game time, and that is real-time in-game. That's not affected by skipping nights or using the time set or time add commands. That's like real time spent in-game. Like it would be tracked on your statistics screen where it says time played and it measures it in days. So I think it's genuinely going to take a long time for them to oxidize. I'm curious how that works on multiplayer servers, though, because they're always logging game time even when players aren't online. So I'm curious if you would log out, and then if you log back in 8 hours later and went to chunks where the golem hadn't been loaded in, it's still going to freeze because the real-time game ticks have passed that deadline, or if it's just going to, remain, it's going to reset that counter for however long the chunks are loaded that the entity is present in. That I haven't been able to test, but I think it's still plenty of time in which to learn. You have to wax a copper golem in order to not have it turn into a statue, so I think it's fairly handleable for players who are getting familiar with the dynamics of working with copper at that point.
Yeah, I'm surprised that it takes that long. I mean, it's good, because I thought if it was going to happen quickly, then it would potentially be confusing and frustrating for players that are new to the whole idea. So I like that it's not going to take that long. I imagine it would be something that needs to be loaded in order for that to happen, right?
Yeah, I would hope, but then the fact that it wasn't being affected by random ticks or like the day-night cycle timings of stuff was what gave me pause for thought there, because the game is always tracking that. There's one of the commands that lets you query real-time game time instead of like what time of day it is in ticks. And I guess it's the same thing on the F3 screen that would track like it is day 37 of your Minecraft world or whatever. And it was that value that seemed to be in charge of the Copper Golem's aging process, because when you reloaded the entity data again, maybe like a day later, it still said the same number, so it wasn't like that was counting down or anything like that. It wasn't telling you how long it had left. It was telling you the exact time at which that Copper Golem would age in real-time game ticks. So again, yeah, I'm not certain if that's different on multiplayer. I'm not certain if there's something else there behind the scenes that isn't immediately apparent from the entity data, but I'm still striving to understand that side of things, I guess.
Yeah. Do you have to be present for copper blocks to age?
Yes, because they're based on random ticks, because they are placed in the world in a way that entities aren't really affected by random ticks in the same way that, crops
Right.
growing or copper aging or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, because that would be weird. Like you put down a bunch of copper blocks that are all copper, and then you walk away, and the chunks are unloaded. Then when you come back into the chunks, they all kind of like load back in, but then they pop and they change right from one to full
Yeah.
oxidation because they've been there for too long. So yeah, that would be kind of a strange interaction. So yeah, I don't know. I wonder if it's the kind of thing where like players might have to come up with data packs to address copper golems on multiplayer servers and like having them behave the way that they want or what have you. So either way, like I mean I like that it's long enough that you're absolutely going to have enough time to wax them if you need to keep them at a certain level. What other things did you notice that were different between Bedrock and Java Edition?
So the main observation I have about copper golems in Java is that they refuse to interact with chests under a lot of different conditions. And it's mainly chests that aren't supported by a solid block, which I think is fairly limiting. Like, I tested out a couple of things. One of the first things I did was place a chest halfway up a wall at like 1.5 blocks high, because that was the point at which a copper golem on Bedrock Edition was able to stand underneath it on a slab, reach up, and still interact with the chest. And the copper golem that I'd spawned in didn't do that. And on Java Edition, they seem to be much more picky about that, because I was putting the chest on top of a double slab, and it still wouldn't necessarily walk up to it and recognize it as a chest it needed to open. And there are some things that, like, for spawning, I think in certain versions it may not be the case anymore, but like if you're building a nether fortress farm, if you're building with nether bricks inside of a certain supporting box, they have to be nether brick blocks and not nether brick double slabs for them to spawn things like blazes and wither skeletons, right? And so it seemed to be tied into a similar behavior where if there wasn't a solid block underneath the chest, i.e. if it wasn't placed on the ground or on like a solid floor of some kind, then the copper golem wouldn't try and interact with it, or it might look over at it, the head would kind of swivel, it would acknowledge the existence of the chest, but it would walk straight past it. On Bedrock Edition, they'll interact with whatever they can see as long as it's within reach, but I'm not certain if maybe that's led to situations where golems are trying to pathfind to chests that they can't reach and they get stuck pathfinding to it. And so I'm curious if this is a bug in their behavior for Java Edition, at least, that's going to be resolved in the next snapshot, or if it's intended because it's going to prevent issues with them getting stuck due to pathfinding to a chest that they can't open. It could even theoretically allow players to define which chests in like a row of chests golems would interact with, because if you imagine having like a long row of double chests but you only want them to interact with 1, 3, and 5, then you can just remove the solid blocks under chests 2 and 4, and they wouldn't go to those, which could be useful in the right circumstances. But yeah, I don't see that being particularly intuitive to new players trying to puzzle out how copper golems work for the first time. So I'm curious if that's something that's going to change as of the next snapshots, and they're supposed to interact with floating chests or anything that's supported by a non-solid block. Like, if I wanted to put a chest on top of, let's say, like Drip Leaf or something like that, is a copper golem going to be able to interact with it? Or is that, even though it's supported by a block visually speaking, is that not the right conditions for the copper golem to interact? I'm also curious if maybe they thought it was immersion breaking to see a golem interact with a chest from below when the top of the chest is the thing that's opening for them to sort through it. On Bedrock Edition, that didn't really seem like much of a problem, and I think it's fine in a game like Minecraft where we don't care as much about the physics of stuff like the floating blocks and canonically supported glitches everywhere in this game. So I'm not certain if that's necessarily a consideration or if this is just behavior that they still need to iron out the conditions for.
Well, and we as players can access chests from below too, right? So like,
yeah, exactly.
It makes sense. I think a copper golem should be able to access things from below, because I mean, you're limiting a lot of creative expression and building. Say if I wanted to put chests on trapdoors as like shelving, like extended trapdoors, and then the only path to get to that chest is for that one copper golem, and I wanted to have like a bunch of copper golems like come up from the sides of a build and go into chests. Like, I can't do that if they can't see that chest, right? Because it's got trapdoors underneath it. I also like the idea, I don't know how practical it would be, but like imagine a bunch of chests in the floor that you're either walking on top of or you look down at an angle to get access to, and there's a tunnel underneath it. And that's where the copper golems are walking back and forth to put things in the chests, right? Like, I think most people would probably want to see the golems, but maybe you don't. Maybe you have a glass floor, and the idea is that you want to watch the copper golems scurry underneath you like ants. Like, there's a bunch of creative stuff that you just wouldn't be able to do if they couldn't access chests from below. I also think that it's going to save some space. So in tight spaces where you might want to have these copper golems sort something from a farm or move something around specifically, being able to have the chest be something they can get to from underneath it means like less space that you need. Also, in terms of technical stuff, it's a less technical way to move an item up compared to using powered dropper chains or a bubble column, right? Those are great for longer distances, but if you only need to move something up by a block or two, then a copper golem might be the way to go. And if they can't access it from below, then that might not be the best way to do it, right?
Yeah, there's certainly a couple of interesting use cases that I think are going to be narrowed slightly by Copper Golem's behavior. We talked in the past about how it's good that they have certain rules that they obey. There's going to be certain behaviors that they will stick to, and learning those rules is what's going to enable players to get the most out of them. But this is an example of when we've learned one set of rules from Bedrock Edition, they behave slightly differently on Java Edition. It seems to narrow their use case for me to the point where I don't find them as exciting. So I'm really hoping that something can be, some sort of middle ground or like some sort of parity can be met between the two versions, because I like the idea of them being able to interact with stuff. Wormbo in the chat is saying that it seems like they only interact with chests at their Y level and maybe one block below, but they won't interact with anything above them. And I think that's fairly consistent with the behavior I've seen as well. So yeah, it may just be that there's some sort of like range issue there. And that seems at odds with changes they made recently where mobs can attack anywhere within the height of their hitbox. Like if you're standing next to an Enderman's head, it's just as able to attack you as if you're standing by its legs. And I think that makes sense for entities being able to interact with containers as well in the case of Copper Golems. So I think it makes a lot more sense for them to be able to interact with whatever they can reach regardless of the circumstances. So that's my 2 cents on it anyway. That's really what I'd prefer in general. But I think that's probably where we'll leave our discussion for today, folks. Thank you so much for listening to The Spawn Chunks. If it's called that for now, so it will remain. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, consider putting some value back in. You can visit patreon.com/thespawnchunks to join our community. Pledging at any level there gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every week. We also have monthly and quarterly hangouts that you can join in on. It's a very, very fun time to be part of our patron community. We currently have 264 patrons, which is down 11 from last week, but the first week of the month usually has a bit of a dip while people's payments are processing, so hopefully we're going to crawl back up to some higher numbers once again. Special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons. That's Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, and That Penguin Dude. Thank you all for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. It's free to just tell a friend about The Spawn Chunks and where they can go to listen to it. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on social media, includes TikTok now. New episodes are published on Mondays on all the major podcasting platforms. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked on the website, that's thespawnchunks.com, and the Patreon-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you get the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/Pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, where I do behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube series. I'm the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. And aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on both Blue Sky and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
I am Joel Duggan on social media, including TikTok as well. You can also find me on Twitch on Tuesdays through Fridays at 10 a.m. Atlantic. That's 9 a.m. Eastern in the US. And on Saturdays at 1 o'clock. And that's 12 noon in Eastern time. I'm going to be working on West Hill. I'm going to be jumping into the snapshots. I also have a new episode of the Citadel Cafe out right now. And that is about the latest James Gunn Superman film. So if you're curious about what Steven and I thought about that, check that out at thecitadelcafe.com.
Thanks for visiting The Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, and it will always include The Spawn Chunks.